All right, so I think we're live now. We are a little bit early, but I'm here with Don the Pleb. I'm not seeing this broadcast appear on the actual YouTube thing, so I'm going to give it a few more minutes here. Um,
Sounds like YouTube.
yeah, I don't know. I thought, for instance, that this would automatically post, even if it were a little bit early, but I guess not. Um,
Uh, it seems to think you're live now.
okay, well, I don't know. I don't want to start the serious. Oh, okay, yes, we are. So apologize for that little hiccup. It's always every time I change my setup, I have to recalibrate these things, so it's always irritating. It's my live streaming has never been very strong because I always have to reset up from my laptop wherever I live stream from. But for people who are just joining us, we're starting this live stream a little bit earlier than anticipated, and today we're going to talk, or I'm going to talk with Don the Pleb, and this has been an ongoing discussion on the right over strategy. And originally, I think the impetus for this conversation was Don the Pleb had a conversation with Charlemagne, an academic agent, concerning strategy on the right. And I'm going to say this here, and it's not meant to be like a gotcha or anything, but what immediately caught my attention so distinctly about that conversation was that it was almost, I had talked to Don in about January 2018, and when I had spoken to Don, his attitude towards strategy was very, very different, almost 180 degrees reversed from his position he took on the stream with Charlemagne, an academic agent. And Charlemagne, an academic agent, and I, even though I don't get to talk to them as much as I'd like, have had very similar ideas on strategy for the last year. And that has been a form of pacifism and parallelism, which is to say that we recognize that the right wing is at an incredible power disadvantage against the mainstream, and that we have to not engage directly and to try to build in parallel with what the current powerful entities are doing. And I think, Don, I don't want to misstate your argument,
Sure.
but perhaps I'll just let you explain your position here and we can continue the discussion from that point.
Sure. So in really, really ridiculous short, for the sake of not being here for 2 hours, simply on this point, the parallelism that is being advocated here is not inherently a bad thing. In fact, it is generally a good thing. Certainly, there will be no co-opting leftist institutions. That's the wildest dream in the world, and I've never had it. But if you're not at bare minimum keeping the legal apparatuses of the left off of you, we joke about getting Waco'd, but it's a somewhat serious joke, right? Waco was a group of people who quite literally said, fine, we'll just go build our own lives. And that was so unacceptable that Waco happened. And I think that the idea that we disengage from politics is begging for anything that we do again or in the future to, by whatever method they realistically can, because I understand there's attempts and methods and things to make it so that they can't so directly Waco you, but the left is quite literally willing to salt the earth if they think the right's getting traction, and I don't think we should ignore that.
Yeah, no, I agree. There has to be an ability to push back with power. This is one of my critiques of the Benedict option, the Rodri, her book, that he keeps on going on about how Christians need to sort of retreat from politics and play the separatist game. I don't know if you'd own up to that specific way of putting it, but that's the takeaway from all of his books. And I'm always saying what you're saying, basically, that we need to keep some political awareness active just so we can rebuff advances that are necessarily going to come from progressives. I guess the big problem here is that we know that we can't attack our prospects for attacking the mainstream and destroying them in any meaningful way are pretty much nil at this stage. We might be able to make the cost of attacking us very, very high, but we're not going to destroy the university system. It might destroy itself, but the prospect of of creating an external assault on the university system seems to be impossible.
So I know there was a decent slug of criticism along the line that we're going to destroy the university system. And my premise for this is not that you and I get together and we lay waste to the university system. That will never happen.
Yeah.
That is not a thing that is within my,
Sure.
If it was within my capability, it would already be done, which is how we know I can't do it.
Yeah. So. Same here. I can't destroy even a more minor university, let alone one of the big ones. Right.
Right. However, there are things we can do that will make it so as life, the universe, and everything destroys them. And they might get themselves there, in some fashion, right? It's some long term. I mean, let's be on what was the Mizzou, I guess. One of the very first college videos that I want to say red-haired lady with the giant problematic glasses. I need some help over here. I need some muscle.
That was Mizzou, I think, right?
Yeah, I think so. But their enrollment was down like 50%, right? So pretty clearly the public doesn't like this sort of thing. And they will strike back in the only way they really can, which is to say, well, then I'm not going there. If you are that kind of ridiculous college, if you are promoting this kind of thing, then I'm not going there. I'm not paying for my kid to go there. And that will eventually destroy them all by itself, right?
Maybe, right? Because they don't rely on middle America to populate their roster. They can easily take people from international schools. For instance, at the same time the whole Mizzou thing was going on, there was a similar incident at Yale with the Halloween costume debacle and this student just yelling down this professor. And Yale didn't suffer at all, right? Because if Yale loses a few people from Georgia who don't apply to them, they'll just take 50 people from China. So they can just shrug it off, right? These are international institutions that can easily recoup their expenses from other areas in the world.
Well, certainly the Yales, the Harvards, I'm not that big a fan of Ivy Leagues, so my list of them is not going to be gigantic. But put whoever you want in the Ivy League category that definitively is going to be able to soak that, right? I mean, it doesn't matter what
schools will be able to soak that for sure.
Yeah,
it's not just the Ivy League; it's all of the big, like Berkeley, Stanford, all of the big flagship schools, UCLA.
I would definitely include them too. Yeah.
I mean, they can there's no lack of people that they can bring on that have over 110 IQs to populate their new undergraduate student body. And as Asia gets richer, they will pay even more for that privilege.
Definitively true. So those are not going to be the ones that die. It's going to be feeder schools for them are going to pay for it. And again, this is all American localized things that will cause them problems. So the answers to those sorts of things are going to be, and this is going to sound ridiculous, go have the right, pass a bill that says you have to have X percentage of multi-generational people of color from the surrounding area. And that percentage needs to be above 75, right? Of localized students, right? And the reason for that, and toss them their social justice in there. Go ahead. 20% need to be localized multi-generational people of color, et cetera, right? And then as people in the United States.
You're going to be doing this as the right?
Well, hold on. Hear me out here, because I get it. This sounds ridiculous, and I understand, right? But if what you're doing is start pulling the federal subsidization of student loans, right? This is already, people are already working on it. You go, you get them to do whatever it is that is most beneficial that way, right? And then you take off.
They'll notice that, right? They'll notice that instantly.
Oh, they're fighting that already, right? So, the right-wing senators who are saying we need to get the federal government out of subsidizing education, the answer to that is college needs to be free, right? And so, they're already fighting, and that's going to be, getting the feds out of direct subsidization of education is, let's pretend, and I do mean pretend, that Trump wins 450 electoral votes and 30 or 40 House seats, so there's a decent sized majority of the House flip red, and then the right picks up 5 senators. If that happens, they'll do it, right? Because the left can't stop them.
Well, why? Because this is one of my main contentions. If you're a senator and you're going to attack an institution like Harvard, which this bill you propose will do because it'll take money away from Harvard, you're essentially, I mean, imagine you're just a cynical like sociopath who only cares about power.
Sure.
Harvard is going to be around for a lot longer. At least if you're, don't worry about the morality of it, but just if you're someone who's buying futures, the predominance of Harvard looks like it's going to last a lot longer than the predominance of the red American voting base. The red American voting base is disintegrating quickly in front of our eyes. And so if you're a senator and you're like, well, I'm going to put my career on the line to attack this really powerful institution that I probably graduated from, if you're talking about ordinary Republican senators. Sure. And so I'm going to make enemies that are billionaires, and because our billionaire class comes from Harvard too, right? And if you attack the prestige of Harvard, you will be attacking the prestige of the piece of paper that they own, implicitly attacking the prestige of their product. So I'm going to make like a huge number of billionaire enemies, and then I'm going to ingratiate myself to this demographic population that's poor and that's not going to be around in 20 years at any meaningful level in a federal capacity. I don't know what senator would, if you're wondering why we can't hold politicians' feet to the fire, it's because of that, right? That credible threat's just not there for us, right?
So that's not quite true. We can't hold politicians' feet to the fire because we don't do anything. And anytime we do, they do pay attention. And I mean, there are a lot of these that I go to semi-regularly, but when Bush was going to pass amnesty, we all went out and said, no, stop it. And he didn't. When Trump was going to take the guns and then do the due process, quite literally Twitter just crapped on him, and he went, okay, never mind. And don't get me wrong,
well, that's getting them not to do things, right?
Do what?
That's getting them not to do things, right? That they were going to do anyway.
Well, so this is the point, right? Is that a lot of the things that I advocate they do is things they're going to do anyway. So there are already House reps and senators out there saying we need to get the feds out of funding college. So this is a thing they already want to do. And so I don't think I could convince them from the ground up that, this would help us. But as long as they're already the ones out there pushing for it, then telling them, yes, do this, you have support is basically just as good as, hey, don't do this. You don't have support. I wish I could remember where this video clip came from, but a bunch of years ago, there was a guy who stacked up a bunch of mail and everybody said it was real cringy, but he quite literally just stood a bunch of mail behind him and said, see, look, I have public support. And that has gone the same general way with like, well, I got 40,000 emails about this and that sort of thing. Politicians are perfectly happy to say, regardless of whether or not it's because they already would have done it. But as long as you give them, hey, look, you have mass public support, they're happy to stand on it as a reason to do it.
Well, I don't know. The problem with me is, this is obviously just a factual contention and I can't push you one way or the other. I have a hard time believing that because the question I ask myself is, if I were a young senator in his 30s, the same age I am, and I was looking at my career, which if you're using Joe Biden as a measurement, could last into my 70s.
Sure.
Doing something that I know is going to make me a bunch of billionaire enemies, and that's going to completely destroy my relationship with my alma mater, so that I can ingratiate a voting demographic that I don't think is permanent. It's so transparently, to me, it seems like a bad strategic move for my own political career that I feel I can kind of stop there. I don't think that Bush really got Harvard angry at him by not passing amnesty. It's not the same thing as, I'm sure they would have liked him to pass amnesty, but not doing something or kind of getting dissuaded from enacting their agenda is quite different than attacking.
Oh, sure.
Basically, it's like doing like McCarthy, for instance. McCarthy is a good example of someone
Yeah.
who's doing what you proposed. He just attacked the mainstay of the political mainstream, and everyone hated him. And after he was defeated, it was over for him, and it was over for all the people who followed him. His legacy was a millstone around the necks of the people that helped him, including Nixon, right up until Watergate. That was, I think, a large reason why they had impeachment of Nixon at such a high priority.
So, yeah. And look, that's, it, I get what you're saying. A poke in the eye is not the same as not giving you a helping hand, right? And that, I mean, that is the split that we're discussing here. And so, is there going to be lots of enemies for this? Yes. Is the 30-year-old senator going to be the one to propose this bill? No. Is the one retiring next term going to be the one that you go to and say, hey, propose this? Yeah. Because then everybody blames him. Then he becomes the McCarthy, and everyone else says, plays the political game. Well, I just voted for it because that's what the party was doing. And is that going to make Harvard love them? No.
You're talking about a move of someone who's like fanatically dedicated to your ideology, and the left has been much better at generating those people than the right has. The right has a lot of pragmatists in power.
Definitely.
I've known a few people maybe this is just a function of where I live. I've known a few people who have run for the Republican Party in office, and they've always struck me as very practical people and people of very low ideological ambition, which is in stark contrast to the Democrats who have this almost religious passion for their ideas. So I guess to me, it seems like I could imagine that happening, but I could never imagine the GOP doing that, because it seems like they all want to retire, and go play golf in the country club. And if what they do makes everyone in the country club angry at them, like taking on Yale would if you were in an East Coast country club, right?
Sure.
I don't know if they're going to have a stomach for that, right? Unless they're dying, right, or something.
Well, like I said, the one that's retiring, because or dying or whatever, right? That and this is the deal: is you're going to have to sell it to them on pragmatic terms, because I don't think you have a wrong assessment there, right? I was, regardless of whatever else you want to say about the situation, Ruth Bader Ginsburg's dying wish was that she be replaced by her progressive. That, I mean, she phrased it differently, but that's what she said. And I, I was, when I was talking about this yesterday, I think, was, look, which one of us is this dedicated to the cause? Just point me at the one. Go ahead, because it's probably one. And they are on, they're not in short supply on the left. So definitely, I agree with you. And so it's going to have to be sold on pragmatic terms. And so it's going to have to be either this handful of people who are supremely ideological. And I mean, Rand Paul would put this forward, but no one would care.
I could see him doing it. Yeah.
But
Rand Paul's kind of unusual in that regard, is that he's a true believer who
definitively.
Yeah. I mean,
if I was lucky and spent enough time researching, I might be able to come up with 5 names to put on this list.
Yeah. I guess this just, to me, and the thing is that the proposal, I think, is what we're saying is we're trying to slow drain money out of Harvard. Mm-hmm. And that's the other thing too, is that because you're slow draining money out of the system, Harvard can, the big schools, all of the flagship schools that are the real heart of this thing, they all can tank a decade or two without these funds. If they know they're going to get them back, if they know that they can call in favors and outlast their political opponents in the Senate, they can totally, if you're not talking about breaking this thing's back in one fell swoop, they'll probably lobby for this to come back. And given the cyclical nature of the political sphere, it's hard to see how they won't do that.
Oh no, they are 100% guaranteed to lobby to get this back, right? Mm-hmm. So this leaves you with the game is raise the barrier to entry, because it's all you can ever do, right? The next time that Barack Obama has a House and a Senate that he can do whatever he wants with, federal subsidization of college will be back in 5 minutes. And they, the left won't have to be talked into it. They have no hesitation using power. And so the primary hopes would be that you do enough damage in the meantime that something is available to make that at least less costly to us when they do it.
Well,
And
the thing
so,
is, I mean, these people have incredible. I mean, Harvard is not on the verge of bankruptcy. It can tank a decade or two without the money.
So it can take a decade of two without the money if all you did was cut off federal funding, right? I mean, the alumni will keep Harvard going for the next literal generation. So it certainly is not going to drop off tomorrow just because of that. And there's no particular reason to assume that it's simply going to fall apart. However, if you wanted to get them more in that direction, right, you sort of the inverse of the Dear Colleague letter, right? Are you familiar with the Dear Colleague letter? I guess
I'm familiar with the Dear Colleague letter. Dear Colleague letters work. I mean, there's a reason why Dear Colleague level letters from Democratic presidents that everyone likes in a college work really, really well.
Oh, yeah.
I really doubt a Dear Colleague letter from Donald Trump would work that well.
No, so you can't make
this is the issue. I mean, the whole thing. You're trying to take a machine and move it backwards in a way it wasn't designed to move, and the Democrats are trying to push the machine in a way it does want to move, and so it's not really hard to see why the Democrats are winning this, right?
Oh no, so that's a mistake of the view.
Sure.
So I don't think that I don't think that Trump could just issue a letter, an executive order, right? So one of the things that I stand on all the time is you can't write an honest rule that dishonest people are going to follow. And that's what that would be, right? We're already seeing this with you're not allowed to teach woke nonsense and the CDC just telling him to pound sand and they're doing whatever they want.
Yeah. As I would expect they would do.
I was surprised it was only the one, honestly. And the reality there might be just that we don't know it's the others.
I would actually suspect that's the case. I would suspect that they're all doing something like that. For instance, I know you're a Californian, so you know this, right? You know that we banned affirmative action in, what was it, 1999? Mm-hmm. We banned racial preferences in college in 1999. Yeah, have you seen, in the subsequent 20 years, have you seen the difference between Asian test scores and African-American test scores at Berkeley or Stanford? Yeah. Are you going to tell me that that's not a racial preference?
Well,
yeah, I mean, so like, so what is it that the whole thing, right? Like, this is the whole difficulty talking about these institutional power relationships and their interaction with government. The government literally told California to not do racial preferences, and then they went ahead and did it anyway for 20 years.
Well, so this is the kind of thing that makes me say, and I know this is going to irritate the hell out of a lot of people, but this is the kind of thing that makes me say that the method to make this work is to stop relying on the government to enforce the problem, because the government won't, right? It's overrun by leftists. Even if it wasn't, it's haphazard at best. That's just how government agencies work. So if instead of the government has to do this, it's hard, any school, right, that is subjecting someone to whatever racial preferencing discrimination must put up all tuition for a full degree as a retainer to sue them, right? And so this is the kind of thing that sounds great to the progressives, and hopefully it is great for the progressives, because they will go out on their own and start destroying each other, and we won't have to do anything
by allowing them to sue each other over racial preferences.
Yeah.
I mean, this has sort of been available. I mean, we've seen some of these lawsuits. I'm not saying this couldn't happen, but
sure,
we've seen some of these lawsuits with Asian Americans suing places like Harvard in the last 15 years, and they don't seem to go anywhere. I mean, they seem to settle a lot, and they don't seem to cause any institutional damage because the left throws all their weight against the Asian American community, and that community backs down, basically.
Sure, but if what you said was you have to put up a 4-year degree worth of cost as a retainer, then what you're doing is saying the bigger the school, the more expensive the school, the more money the school has to put up as a retainer for the student to be able to spend on legal fees to sue them, right? And so what that's going to do is incentivize lawsuits. People who otherwise wouldn't have sued, all these people running around screaming everything is racist, everything is sexist, everything is homophobic, just ambulance chasers will show up and go, you're saying everything is racist, sexist, and homophobic. Would you like to sue the school? And they, because regardless of whether or not the elite portion of the progressives care about any of this, the foot soldiers do. And if you give the foot soldiers the power to destroy the people who are the elites, they will. They cannibalize everything when they think they can. And so the idea here, as much as pull federal funding is relevant and it's important and it's something that the right already wants to do, if you, the idea that little nobody student would be able to sue the hell out of Yale because Yale is racist is a thing you could take to AOC and then say it had bipartisan support because she'd be on board in 5 minutes.
Well, I mean, this is several things. There's two reactions to this. The first one is what you're saying is something that is very possible, which is that we could set a let's just take the specific proposal off the table and just talk about it in the most general sense. We could create laws that would encourage the left to fight itself.
Yes.
And I think ultimately, my reaction to that is ultimately the universities are going to fall because they're insolvent and they're wasting people's money and time. And they're ultimately, in my opinion, going to fall due to a civil war inside their own apparatuses. I think that's how they're actually going to fall, as a civil war. In that case, all of the problems I listed with Republicans doing it, those don't apply anymore. And also, it's hard to use a Rolodex against your own institution, right? Because those Rolodexes overlap. You can't call in favors when everyone else on the other side's calling in the same favors, right?
Right.
So I agree with that, and it's not impossible, in my opinion, for this to be hinted at pushed. It's not impossible for them to be pushed in this direction by conservatives. My only objection in that sense is that it seems it's kind of there's a lot of imponderables. It's like doing something that has a long chain of causality. And it's why kind of conspiracy theories never work, is that there has to be this like a long line of things that all have to go correct in order for it to explode in your enemy's face. So it kind of becomes like a Ruth Goldberg machine to get your opponent to fail. The other objection I have really quickly, and I'll let you come in again, is this is something that me and a lot of people have talked about for a really long time. So hypothetically, how we have these protected classes that you can't discriminate against, right? There are these protected classes like race, religion, where if your company or your employer is apparently discriminating against any of these groups, lawsuits can be brought and quite hefty payouts can be given. But this is something that we've talked about for a long time, and Project Veritas has uncovered. I have not to say that I agree with everything James O'Keefe does, but this you hear CEOs say explicitly what we've always known, is that courts do not entertain discrimination suits brought by the wrong side of any of these protected classes. So both black and white people are protected under the race protected class, but the courts don't entertain white claims to discrimination and haven't for 30 years now.
Ever?
And obviously they have some institutional excuse for doing this, but you hear James O'Keefe recently interviewed CEOs from, I think it was Facebook and a few other companies, and they laughed about how they could fire people for being white and male and no one would have a lawsuit problem. And they were explicit about that. They knew that the courts, even if they did it because of race, because of gender, because of sexuality or whatever, if they did it in the right direction, they would not have to actually have their legal team review it. And so this theory of, we will allow the left to be destroyed by lawsuits, superfluous lawsuits. They've already had one chance to destroy themselves that way, which is to take seriously the discrimination lawsuit availability. So, and they haven't taken it, right? If everyone who could sue an institution for discriminating against white males did so in the same way that people do so for African Americans, a lot of these companies and colleges would be completely bankrupt. I mean, just think of how much Cal has been discriminating against Asians, for instance.
Well, I assume this stream could launch about a half dozen lawsuits, and that's just off the top of our heads. So, yeah.
But what I'm saying here is that there's some mechanism that we're not taking into account that is keeping everyone pushing in the same direction.
Sure.
There's some kind of ant smell that progressives have that let them know that, okay, like this lawsuit is fair game because you're pushing in the progressive direction. This lawsuit, even though you might make a lot of money off on it, is not fair game and will end your career as a lawyer. And so if this same dynamic plays out, you could have some kind of automatically paid retainer fee to sue colleges for racial discrimination. But if this same kind of implicit organization or implicit bias carries through the same way it did in discrimination lawsuits, it might be that no one actually sues the colleges because there's an understanding in the legal profession that we just don't do that.
So let's roll back to the first one. So this isn't a large chain of events all have to occur one right after the other in positive succession. This is simply availability, right? You wouldn't even need a high percentage of the students to be suing the college because the grants in these things are gigantic. If you sue someone because they were big, mean, and racist against you, it's a lot of money.
How does this not fall into the trap of the white discrimination, right? Like if you were to sue Google for discriminating against black people, go ahead. Sure.
So the point here is that any hit is going to be a big hit. And you could even, as opposed to yanking federal funding, tie these two together. If you accept federal funding, you have to accept this other measure because according to all you colleges, you're racist, sexist, bigoted, homophobic. Oh, and by the way, if you lose one of those lawsuits, we're not supporting racists, therefore. Right. And that makes every single one of those lawsuits gigantic. That makes them massive. And it sounds good to the left. Right. Because we don't want to support racist stuff. And so the left ends up in a position where it has to argue openly against itself, which even if that's the worst thing that comes, is not bad. Right. Right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree. I guess the problem with that answer is that it implicitly relies on the thing that I'm contesting in my second objection, right? Because we know from history that, like I just said, discrimination against white or Asian applicants don't pay out in these huge damages or these huge settlements the way that discrimination suits do when they are against communities that the left favors more.
Approves of, right? Oh, definitely.
Yeah, sure.
I mean, I don't know what we know because nearly all of those are sealed, but we can surmise fairly easily that it's not enough money to destroy the college in a single lawsuit because the colleges are still there. So even if they settle behind a non-disclosure, we know it's not enough to destroy them. So that seems like 100% reasonable assertion to me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I guess what the way that I think the college civil war will eventually play out is that the colleges, the way they're moving right now is that they basically fire their students from Middle America, from Red America, and then they have a bunch of high IQ foreign students that comprise their engineering programs, literally make their science and STEM fields work, and they get grants funded and they make new technology and they work with Silicon Valley. And then in complete parallel to that, they have another campus where they have purely ideological students that allow them to essentially meet the diversity requirements, but also have not necessarily so diverse students who are ideologically on board with their institutional mission.
Yeah.
And that these two, that this is increasingly, they're just going to fire the middle, and it will be, everyone will fall into one of these two categories. They'll either be keeping the engine going or they'll be pursuing the ideological mission. And I think that eventually these two halves of the university will declare war on each other because their economic interests will diverge. The question is, and this really relies on the nature of the universities themselves, is how long can they keep these two sides of the university from declaring war on each other?
Well,
and as far as I'm concerned, this relies more on how intelligent progressives are, and they're getting dumber, and less on what Republicans actually do. I mean, Republicans, it's very hard to force your enemy to do something stupid. It's very easy to let him do something stupid. And this is sort of where I am with this whole kind of double gambit maneuver.
So this is the deal, right? Is you're not trying to force him. You're just giving him the option. And the reality of the option of college is that they cycle a lot of people through there. And so you're pinging the random number generator a lot, right? Mm-hmm. You're going to come up with, for gaming term purposes, you're going to come up with that natural 20 at some point. If you make the cost of losing that suit ridiculous, then make no mistake, they'll pull out all the stops, they'll fight it. But it doesn't really matter because you're going to keep pinging the random number generator. And so you will hit them. Make no mistake, this is not like it's not going to go away in the next 5 minutes. But to your earlier second criticism, one of the things that I don't think the progressives even understand is that they have spent a lot of years telling Black America that Whitey hates you and that Whitey owns everything. Mm-hmm. And so, if California in the 90s, if you had a disagreement with a Black person, the only reason that you had a disagreement is because you were racist. The rest of the country was years behind this. They were not anywhere near, this was 2014. YouTube was happening in 1990 in California.
Yes.
And it's, I'm sure it was happening in Detroit as well, but in Baltimore, what have you. But it was happening all over California.
And California shows that you can keep this going for at least 20 years.
As long as you can leech off of something bigger, definitely, right? And so that would be, again, the tie, right? So if you lose one of these lawsuits, you lose federal funding, so you no longer get the leech, right? And so now you have to actually go out and get it yourself, and they're substantially worse at this. And even more importantly, I don't find your Civil War assessment to be incorrect. I think that is a very ridiculous, particulars aside, seems like how this is going to go, because these universities are so filled with Marxist indoctrination. At some point, their proletariat and their bourgeoisie are going to clash. Yeah. and that is basically what's going on there. And if they no longer can go get federal funding because they lost one of these lawsuits, because somebody showed up and decided that Whitey owns the university and Whitey's evil, and so we need to sue Whitey and get our money, which, by the way, is a pervasive enough view that the chances of it happening are near 100% given an even reasonable timeline, you're going to stoke that fire faster, right? And you're going to force as soon as you give them the option and they take it, they are going to force that civil war faster and harder.
I guess based on what I've seen from the non-discrimination lawsuits, I just wouldn't hold my breath that even with a random number generator, you're necessarily going to get a fair accounting from lawsuits, right? Sure. Otherwise, the random number generator would have landed Berkeley in court in the last 20 years with a lawsuit against Asian discrimination. And
didn't not got 5 years ago.
They did, but they didn't have a big settlement. They didn't have a big cost to them. They settled, I believe they settled out, and it was more or less a speed bump for them. It wasn't a scandal that threatened to bring the entire school down, right? I know that's right. That's probably what would have happened if they were caught secretly discovering, if it was secretly came to light that they were discriminating against African Americans. I imagine they would have had to fire the provost and half a dozen chancellors and deans, and a lot of heads would have rolled. Yes. But I don't believe that anyone lost their job at Cal because they settled out of court for a discrimination lawsuit against Asian Americans. Even though logic would dictate that they should, right? What?
Well, somebody with tenure got a write-up. That's what happened.
Yeah. I mean, it's like you got a speed ticket, right? I mean, and that's the most they suffered for 20 years of explicitly ignoring a law that was passed in 1999, as far as I can tell.
Sure.
And so I guess here's sort of my main contention is that when this civil war happens, the thing that the progressives want to cash in more than anything else is they want to have a scapegoat that they can blame all of this on. And the Progressive Coalition would really, really like the scapegoat to be white and Republican and Christian and come from a red state.
Yes.
Now, if Republicans are there, just basically explicitly, I'll swear, if they're explicitly sitting there and fucking with these universities, that actually might help the universities forestall the civil war on their hands, because every time the proletariat and the bourgeoisie come complain about their plight and how they're being screwed over by the college will point to the evil red staters and go, oh, look, if only the scourge of these Republicans were done away with, we could give you exactly what you wanted, even though it's quite obvious that the reason why the proletariat and bourgeoisie disagree is that they're fighting over the same finite amount of resources. This is sort of what it's hard to ignore in California, where I've lived in places where there's virtually no Republican Party, in Seattle and Portland and Northern California. And what you notice living there is, first of all, there's almost no serious Republican Party.
Oh, no.
But all the politicians constantly talk about Republicans.
Mm-hmm.
But that's because the only reason why Jenny Durkin or any of these other politicians that are not actual socialists, the only reason why they're in office is because they can tell this horror story about these yokels from the hinterlands coming over and destroying their progressive utopia in Seattle, Berkeley, or San Francisco.
Sure.
That's literally how California writes off its homeless problem. They say that the reason why San Francisco is inundated with homeless is that they're all fleeing from red states. That's what they tell themselves, and the people buy this. Newsom
unironically got up and said that in a news conference 2 years ago. We wouldn't even have a homeless problem if it wasn't for Texas.
And so easy out, give them such a pressure release valve. Certainly the reactionary critique that what we're doing is actually helping our enemies when they're about to make a mistake, rather than actually accelerating their decline.
Sure. So take a look at what I'm asking be done here.
Mm-hmm.
Get the feeling we just dropped.
Yeah, I think that hold on, let me reset this thing. Okay, I think we're back. Guys in the chat, I think we're back, but let me know if...
I'm seeing a couple it's back. Okay, it's good now.
Yeah, it seems like it's good. I think it's back at least.
Okay, so I have no idea where they cut off, which is going to make some of this make no sense. But the general premise, I think, is that basically anything we do, we help them, right?
Well, yeah, if we are present in a capacity where it looks like we're competing or subverting them, then this allows them to use us as a scapegoat.
Sure. So this is why I say do such subversive things is what I'm talking about, right? Because what I'm talking about is not very straightforward. If you go out and yank federal funding directly, then the left is going to lose their mind. If, on the other hand, if you pair this with another big ask, right? So you go out and you propose something, let's face it, that's probably not going to pass, but something ridiculously right-wing. I can't even imagine what, but
repeal the 19th.
There you go. Right? You run out and you go, this is a bill to repeal the 19th Amendment.
Yeah.
And at the same time, you go, but we understand that your guys are going to be pissed. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to make it so that if a college is found to be racist, that they don't get federal funding, because we don't agree with racism either. We think you guys are kind of onto something here. And then you go fight on the repeal of the 19th or whatever, and everybody gets all upset. And then you get both the big ask and the small ask, right, for negotiating tactic purposes. And if what comes of that is that you're running around with both a bipartisan thing and something supremely based over here, and the bipartisan thing passes, then everybody goes, oh, well, that was okay, right? It wasn't, I don't know, building the wall, which is probably not a thing that we're going to be able to ask for again because there's going to be a wall. But we're going to line the wall with automated turrets, right? You're going to what? Oh my God, you can't do that. Yeah, but did we mention racism is wrong? So do this with colleges over here and yank federal funding and create this availability of lawsuits and blah blah blah, right? And so you get the likelihood of it being passed. It sounds like something that the left wants. The left will invariably sign on to it. And the other portion of this criticism that is relevant is somewhere in there was, self-evidently it is them doing this to themselves, but they're just lying that it's Republicans anyway. Well, they're going to do that no matter what, right? If literally there were zero right-wing people in the country, I don't even know how that would happen, but let's say that it happened, it would be, this is the vestige of what the right wing did 50 years ago, and we're still dealing with that problem. So
they'll lie, right?
Yeah,
they'll lie and say that it's okay. So this
lying about us,
and this sort of gets me into and obviously we're just going to have to. You get to the points in the conversation where it's just disagreement about fact or attitudes towards things aesthetically, but this is, and I'll kind of lay out the general critique of this is that your idea is very clever, and it could work hypothetically, like doing something sort of like very, very nefariously, like Littlefinger from Game of Thrones, like master manipulator type deal. But this is how I see it. I believe that the reason why I'm less fond of this idea is that it forces right-wing leaders to be disingenuous and to essentially misrepresent their own views. And the thing that I think is going to be the eventual undoing of the left is the fact that they have to constantly lie, and their alternative can speak in plain language with sincerity. And I think I see this more and more when I watch BreadTube. A curse that I'm constantly saddled with is a desire to watch BreadTube. It always seems like they're speaking through their teeth. It always seems that they're acting. And I believe that when I watch a right-wing video who I don't agree with, it feels more sincere to me. And so when I see these very clever ideas that are kind of based on political gambits, what I'm thinking is, well, what I really want is I want a scenario where the right-wing leaders have the advantage of being able to speak truthfully, and it's the left-wingers who constantly have to lie to find scapegoats. Having Gavin Newsom stand up and blame the hinterlanders, it's transparently obvious that that's the fact that these things are lies, or an absolute lies. That's not a neutral thing. That is actually a strength, because it's very, very easy to see a lie. It's much more difficult to see an exaggeration or a half truth. And if when Democrats inevitably blame conservatives, it's a lie, that will be much, much weaker than if it's an exaggeration of what actually happened.
True. So I don't, one of those things that is absolutely a requirement of this, whether I want it to be or not, is that it is going to have to, at least writ large, be something that the right agrees with, right? There's the suggestion of the repeal the 19th. I don't even think we could get, but like, all right, we got your chat, my chat, AA's chat.
Well, I mean, we were just talking about a hypothetical, quote unquote, right-wing idea that would never win. And that's sure. No one is working for Repeal the 19th. If you're a left-winger watching that, that's just a meme. It's a hypothetical thought experiment. No one's going to do it. There's no secret right-wing conspiracy to repeal the 19th Amendment. That's just a joke. But it is an example of a hypothetical right-wing policy that would fail on impact. Right? The producers, the producers' springtime for Hitler of policy ideas.
This is the thing, right? So it will have to be something that the right at large would agree with. And the right at large doesn't seem to like racism. And so if you tailor a policy to the idea of punishing racists, the right will be okay with it. And specifically, if you include due process, which you would, because they'd have to be sued first, right? And then you tailor the idea of the left destroying itself in policy to a thing that the right would support, but you tailor the what it is that you're saying even to things that the left would support. Because let's face it, with very few exceptions, nobody is supporting racism in this country, and certainly no politician. It doesn't matter. Okay, the left is supporting racism, but they're not calling it racism, right? And so, if you said, "Hey, right wing, how about if these colleges that are determined racist, we yank their federal funding?" Because Trump just did this. I forget the college said we're all racist and sexist and bigoted and homophobic, and he went, "Okay, well, start the investigation." They said they were. Take them at their word. And so, one, it would stop them from doing that, because if you come out and say that, right, then you're admitting that you're racist, and bam, everybody gets to sue you. And on top of that, you lose federal funding. And so it squelches their PR narrative just instantly.
I guess we are relying on philosophical consistency from the left to make this plan work, which is, again, that kind of makes me, I'm not saying it couldn't work, but that always has been, it's always been one of the right's mistakes, is that they assumed that the left would apply these principles across the board and that the internal contradictions would eventually catch up with them. California is the perfect example. That doesn't happen, right? So what I would be worried about is that this assumption that if the left admits that they're racist, they immediately have to pay for it. I would challenge that. I would challenge that being true.
So the point of that is not that some magical force would come down and they would instantly lose federal funding, right? Because if you have a Democrat president, they're not losing federal funding, right? Well, they're not saying they're that kind of racist. They're the other kind of racist. They're trying to squelch systemic racism. They're trying to fight the thing that would make them lose funding. The excuses will be abound. However, if you have one conservative student at that school, literally one, and he knows that when he enrolls in school, if his dean comes out and says, or his president of the school comes out and says, this school is racist, sexist, bigoted, and homophobic, that his legal fees are paid if he sues, he'll probably wait till the last year he's there, but he'll sue, right? And so you don't even need to worry about left's consistency. And equally speaking, the availability of that, right, for the people who are going to college and they have no idea what they're doing and I'm fairly certain you've spent a substantial amount of time in college. There's lots of these people.
Unfortunately, I have multiple grad degrees, so yeah. Unfortunately,
there are tons of these people, right? They have no idea what they're doing. They're just there because they got told to be there, and lots of them are nihilistic and weird and all kinds of stuff. And they would take up that lawsuit, or at least some of them would. And so what this becomes is you prime the wheel. You create lots and lots and lots of avenues where they can destroy themselves for being themselves. And then you sit back and wait, and you do it under a guise that they agree with.
I guess I'm fine. I feel like a lot of those avenues already exist. If we want to build more of them, I don't have anything against that necessarily. I just think that if you're a right-wing leader, I think that the most important thing is to play a very, very straight game. I think this is one of the problems that we get into, is that when we try to play very, very complicated games with the left, trying to hold the left to a consistent standard of their own morality, it never seems to work. I think that the thing that will eventually kill the left is, look at us, we're being sincere, we're pointing to reality, we're reacting to these things as they appear to us in the most innocent possible way. I think that is the core strength of the right, and in many ways more deadly to the left than a convoluted attempt to encourage them to kill themselves. I think they will kill themselves. That's the only way they can die. But I'm not so sure how easy it would be to assist that process. I think that's something that has to happen organically. And I think that the most important thing for the right is to maintain its simple honesty and its simple sincerity. And I guess, while I'm not necessarily against these propositions, my worry is that they will overshadow or attempt to be something that is more freestanding and more sincere.
I don't think so. One, and this is why I said it's going to have to be something that the right already agrees with, right? Because whether or not all politicians are liars, whether or not whatever pejorative we want to throw at right-wing politicians who don't care about right-wing things or whatever, you can't get them to go out and do something they overtly don't want to do. It's just not a doable thing, and it's not a thing we should even try to do, because if they already have an idea that, and by the way, I don't think there's a conservative politician that thinks schools are good, right? So there's your entryism is, well, there's something wrong here, and we don't really know what we can do to fix it. And so if you give them hey, I know you think there's a thing that's going wrong in these schools, and look, I think we all agree that what they're doing is indeed racism. So give them the rope to hang themselves, right? Let them, if they're going to be racist, suffer these problems. And while that may result in 500 white people that get their grades curtailed, or their SAT scores cut, or whatever it is, suing and getting nowhere, it only takes the one black person, right? And then the penalties are so huge that it is difficult to recover from, and the recovery itself will be a road to self-destruction.
I mean, unless the judges are hypocrites with their awards, right?
Well, so that would be the relevant thing, right? Is it doesn't matter if the judges are hypocrites, because
couldn't the judge be like, Berkeley is a great place, I like Cal, go Bears, like, so we're going to give you like a meaningless slap on the wrist for this infraction, get back to work?
That depends very much on how you word the law, right? So if you just leave it vaguely as we're determined to be racist, that slap on the wrist is now losing federal funding, right? Mm-hmm. And so what you would need is every single court in the land to suddenly decide that it doesn't matter what colleges do, they're not racist. And that doesn't seem like a thing that a very progressive justice system is willing to do.
I guess, from my perspective, in order for these legal ramifications to have teeth, it can't be a one-time thing where we rely on a justice. I guess you're saying that you're going to have like mandatory penalties.
Oh, like, yeah. Mandatory. So, you're Berkeley, right?
Yeah. I mean, the thing is, like, the progressives aren't going to be like one-time infractions. I mean, you lose federal funding for all time.
So make it for 10 years, and then they can reapply, or so,
because they don't. The progressives don't want that. They don't want anyone to lose federal funding. They want to bring them in line. So they'll have the antidote be like, unless they take immediate action to like rehire this many diversity professors and so on and so forth, right?
So even if that was the route we went, you're just accelerating their civil war, right?
I guess. I mean, they're kind of if you're saying, well, this bill will be something that looks completely progressive. I guess that's going to happen, right? Eventually, they're going to have to face down this contradiction at some level, right? I guess I don't really want to be a part in immanentizing the eschaton, so to speak. That's a Christian phrase, meaning Christians have a saying that you don't immanentize the eschaton, which is you don't try to make things worse with the hope that
it gets better.
Jesus is going to come back and make everything better, right? So you can wait and hope for the end of the world, but you can't participate in fulfilling the prophecy. And I have a very similar attitude towards the decline of these institutions. I feel that as soon as you have a hand in trying to accelerate these things, it's probably going to backfire. I think that there are many contradictions involved in this, and involved in the institutions that the progressives have created. Sure. I just can't see a way that you can directly push them over the edge. I feel that they're very likely going to figure out what's going on and just double down on it, or they're going to nip it in the butt, I should say.
So this is why you can't try to hold them ideologically accountable, right? Because they just don't care, and that is, one of those things that I tell everybody all the time is stop pointing out leftist hypocrisy. They don't care. You can point. I mean, look, you could get up every morning at 5 a.m., go to bed at midnight, and do nothing but point out leftist hypocrisy. And 10 people on planet Earth will care that are not already the right wing.
Although there are ways that you can talk about it that do naturally get the progressives unhappy. Mm-hmm. I've noticed that if you discuss the reality of the situation in very, very neutral terms, and don't try to play off the hypocrisy like a political point, then you can oftentimes, and if you obviously translate it outside of the progressive buzzwords, you can oftentimes have people hear a narrative of what's being asked, and they'll react to that. For instance, a good example would be the destruction of statues, right? If you go like, oh, well, they're hypocrites for not tearing down Washington too, that the leftists will not react to that, right?
Well, they will. They'll say, let's tear down Washington.
Yeah, and maybe some of them will, and the boomer ones will be like, oh, that's ridiculous conspiracy theory, whatever, right? Yeah. But is this saying something like, well, I guess we're tearing down statues now in the hope that it will make things better for minority relations? If you just say that matter-of-factly and neutrally, because that's literally what's going on, and just say it like it's what you're observing, no emotions, oftentimes progressives will hear that, and you can tell that they're reprocessing what's actually going on. So yeah, talking about it like it's hypocrisy and getting really angry about it in a political way, that does not work. But simply restating what you're saying as part of clown world, that's an old term, I guess. It's already feeling dated saying it, but pointing at, just narrating very plainly what you're saying in this new world, that I've oftentimes seen people react to that much better for whatever reason.
I could say, well, so it disengages the fight mechanism, right? It is no longer lol, you're an idiot. It's you might even get better traction framing it as a question. I don't understand how tearing down statues increases minority relations. Someone please help me.
I fail to see how this works. Very innocent questions or very innocent statements without immediate political implications. Yeah, they tend to work a lot better for whatever reason. I guess from my money, this is getting back to my point about sincerity and directness being the greatest tools of the right wing, rather than political machinations. I think political machinations are something that, because of what the right is, don't work very well at all.
So, and this is why political machinations are going to have to be very specific for the right.
Sure.
I mean, you will never get the right wing to come out and go, we're banning colleges. That's, it's not going to happen. Would I love to see it? Yeah, sure. It's a pipe dream. And so what you have to do is make this a thing the right already agrees with, because you have to acknowledge the sincerity of the right. You do. And if you try to get around it, the first thing that will happen is everyone on the right will go, I'm not doing that. And so the premise here is it has to be almost designed bipartisan, right? And it has to be designed bipartisan in a fashion that the right will accept, as will the left, even if neither one of them find it particularly to be the perfect answer, right? Because you could walk through the entire ranks of the Republican caucus going, don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good, and they would all understand what you mean immediately. And then simply telling them, well, go to the left and tell them that you're trying to throw them a bone, because you kind of are, right? You're handing them a thing that they presumably will like as best you can in your own framing. And so, it can never be based on go lie to them. It can never be based on let's do twisted things, regardless of whether or not it will result in some colleges paying what amounts to the ultimate price for the college. The answer there is, well, should we be supporting colleges that are performing overt racism? And again, whether or not anybody particularly cares about racism in very right-wing YouTube, the country does. Senators do, House representatives do, presidents like to say, I did non-racist things, I made it so racist institutions will be destroyed.
But let's take this back. Like, I can go to somebody in Berkeley, California, and go and say something like, well, I guess we're tearing down these statues to prevent institutional racism.
Mm-hmm.
And they'll kind of step back, they'll kind of double take on that, right? Because they'll agree with what I'm saying, they'll agree that the statues are being torn down because they are,
mm-hmm.
and they'll agree that their objective is to destroy institutional racism. But when I put it simply in that formulation, the putting it so nakedly causes them to react in a bad way, causes them to double take, causes them to think about it.
Mm-hmm.
The problem with saying Cal, for those people who aren't from California, UC Berkeley, the problem with saying UC Berkeley is a racist institution is that no progressive is going to process that in a way that does not lead to a progressive bromide. That's not an innocent observation of reality. That is charged language using a word that progressives basically control.
Definitely.
No one is. It's like calling Bausch a white supremacist. The thing is, it's obviously. I mean, you're trying to hoist someone by their own petard, and sometimes that's, and in some ways, that's necessary because their definition of white supremacist is so broad. Everyone who's white is a white supremacist, right? And so sometimes in a debate, you can try to invert it that way to try to get points, but that's not an innocent statement. That's not an innocent statement, and people will immediately perceive UC Berkeley as racist as a non-innocent statement, as a politically charged statement, and their shields are going to go up. So I guess the problem I'm foreseeing is that reality you're trying to get people to accept, they'll reject it, and they'll immediately perceive the conservative interpretation of it as being something that people are trying to manipulate them into believing, which means people will not believe it, most likely.
So the point here, I don't care what people believe, right? So the point here is to impose a cost on them, because a lot of what progressives do is cost free. I mean, almost everything progressives do is cost free. If they say racism is the worst thing on earth and anyone or anything that is racist should be ejected into the sun, and the next day they come out and they go, "Oh, I'm racist," there's no cost for that. Right. In fact, it's seen as beneficial to them. However, if mandated in law, the moment that something removed from public consciousness, what the courts are doing, right, determines that they are being racist in any given situation, and then they are compelled to pay a cost already. Right. And that cost is simply lack of subsidization. We're not asking for anything from them. We're just no longer giving them something. Then I think you end up with a very much more realistic capability. And presumably no one will market this law as, we know that every single institution in this country is racist, and therefore we're getting rid of Yale and Harvard and Berkeley and Stanford. Mm-hmm. That's not going to happen. There's no particular reason to do that. I mean, approaching it substantially more neutrally. Look, the federal government should not be supporting racist institutions. So if your school is determined to be racist, or even make it any institution that receives federal funding, is determined to be racist specifically through court, there are lots of ways to, and you can just pull the scale back. So you see,
the average person on the street is not going to walk down. They're not going to walk through Berkeley thinking this university is racist. Like, that's not going to be a thought in their mind.
No.
So you're hinging this on a political reality that is not embraced by the very progressives you want to enforce it.
Oh no,
and that's
so the progressives don't have to enforce it, right? So you just simply this changes the budget this year, so they no longer receive these funds. Their grants are revoked for even X period of time, and you don't need the average person to think it, right? The average person seems to be very afraid that there are indeed a bunch of white supremacists out there who are about to take over the country, and maybe we shouldn't be federally funding them. I don't think that would be a hard sell.
I mean, who exactly is going to do this? Like bureaucrats, because they'll be the ones pulling the trigger on this, right?
Oh no,
is no one going to notice that they're robbing their own institution of a significant amount of capital because
I'm sure they will,
of a label they don't agree with? They'll notice that for sure, right?
So again, I think the answer to this is you provide capability for Citizen A to be able to have some sort of enforcement mechanism, right?
Citizen A relies on the court and administrators to actually do this, right? I mean, he might win the court, but
the court, yes, in the sense that you would still need administrators. However, the court likes this sort of thing. They even when they're running overtly progressive things, they like to be in control of stuff. It's the first thing you will ever learn about judges if you have interaction with them, is that if for a moment they feel out of control, they're suddenly pissed. It's why they are so ruthless with contempt of court, with ignoring court orders, any of that sort of stuff.
Yeah, because they don't want to be led around by the nose. And I do very much respect this strategy, but I do feel that in order for me seeing it work in my imagination, I have to believe that these judges are going to be led around by their nose to do things that they don't want to do.
I don't think so. I think that a lot of this relies on them doing things that they generally do want to do. Now, don't get me wrong.
California judge wants to take a big chunk out of Cal and burn it. I haven't met him.
So this would be the relevant portion of putting this as a federal law as opposed to a California law, because this will never pass in California. It might pass in California, but it as a federal law, you get away from California judges very quickly and you move to federal judges, and that helps a lot.
But I still don't think any federal judge wants to take federal judges, if it's not Berkeley, it's also Yale or Harvard or any of these other colleges, right? Like, sure. None of these judges want to be the one who ripped a chunk out of these institutions that are idolized by the upper class. Who wants to be the judge who walks into a country club who took a bite out of Yale, right?
Not very many, probably.
Yeah, exactly. Right. So I mean, so you're trying to lead these judges around by the nose to do something that they will constitutionally not want to do for their own self-interests.
So, some ways yes, some ways no. So it's going to depend a lot on what happens in the case, right? Because if what happens in the case is that, and again, you're just spinning the random number generator wheel a lot here. So I'm not saying this will happen with the first, second, third, fifth, or even 10th case, but it will happen eventually.
But when they get it though, right? The thing is that there's this when the random number generator turns up the lucky 7 or whatever, the hard 20 or whatever, there's a line of bureaucrats that all have to do the right thing in order for this to actually have teeth. And at every one of those stages that I see, the bureaucrats from the judge on down, they have no desire to do this. And so it's basically like this continuous line of trust you have to assume is going to happen, right? So
no. And this is why you write the law as it happens immediately, right? Have the money go somewhere. And that will be the most relevant thing, right? So if any of these lawsuits occur, it goes to the national debt. If no national debt, then it goes to, I don't know, Medicare, right?
The national debt does not have any defenders, by the way. That's equivalent to burning the money. There's no one who's showing up. If the national debt loses money, no one shows up in court going, you can't take that money away from the national debt.
Right.
People will show up in court saying, you can't take that money away from Yale, Berkeley, Harvard.
No.
And they'll have tons of very, very rich and powerful friends that will back them up.
that's not the point, right? So the way that you would get that done in their case is take this to SCOTUS, right? Because and what they'd be arguing is the law is unconstitutional, and maybe they win that case, maybe they don't. It's going to realistically rely on who's on the court more than anything else, and SCOTUS doesn't really seem to care about most of this. They are preoccupied with whatever it is that they think is otherwise important. So that is entirely a gambit based on who's on the court at the time, whether or not, the left packs the court with 30 judges, any number of things, right? But that's not a thing that we're going to be able to solve. If there is a thing that is literally insoluble, then you just have to leave it alone. I'm not assuming that it goes our way or not, but either way, that's a massive expenditure of the left fighting the left. Because SCOTUS cases unto themselves are multiple millions of dollars. And whether or not, you're sitting on, if you're Harvard, they're sitting on like a couple billion, still multiple millions of dollars is not nothing, right? In fact, there's a decent possibility that they could spend upwards of $20 million fighting this case between the various places it has to go, which, look, it's $20 million. Good. They lost it. And they lost it fighting them. So even better, right?
Yeah, and I think we're probably at the verge of beating this to death. So I'll just transition to a different topic if you still have time.
Oh yeah.
I guess it's still not. Given that I feel like I grew up around a lot of the kind of upper middle class, lower upper class people that would have to operate in order to get this kind of punitive action to work. For me, the pathway to actually taking this money away from the college in a way that's permanent, it seems tenuous. But I want to just grant you that there's a possibility that this could work and perhaps move on. Sure. Since a lot of people requested this, and I haven't talked about this on my own stream yet, I'll just ask you and let you, do you want to talk at all about the Ruth Bader Ginsburg death? And since you're the person who cares a lot more about political consequences of these things, maybe do you have any thoughts about how the right should react to the Ruth Bader Ginsburg tragically passing away?
So I am not I'm not here to tell you not to post crab memes, by all means. But no, I don't think it's a good idea that the right, specifically faces of the right, run out and say, yay, ding dong, the witch is dead. That is probably not a good thing. On the other hand, stop lying to compliment the woman. I am my line of this for the moment for me is what Trump said, which is to say, she had an amazing life. Whether or not you disagreed with her, she was an amazing woman. Now, I don't personally know Ruth Bader Ginsburg, and I never did. So for all I know, that is true. What I have seen of her life, I find amazing, but not in particularly good fashion. But for all these people who are out there going, oh, she was a champion of this, and she was great about this, and she did all these great things, stop doing it. We are lionizing a leftist hero, and it is a person that 6 weeks ago you hated, and everybody knows it.
I will say there are some people on the right who have taken, I have all said the same thing that I said on my Twitter feed. Just respect the seemliness of speaking about the dead that has been classically a regulation in Christian company, and that is to refrain from saying anything that isn't that is overly negative or not on point, and try to let some time pass. But I will say there have been people on the right who've taken a third tact, which is to write honest biographies or obituaries of Ruth Bader Ginsburg that have been somewhat inconvenient. She had a very long career, and she had very many opinions during that career that were certainly not in line with where modern progress certainly is. And I found those biographies / obituaries to be useful and illuminating, and not disrespectful, certainly. And I think maybe talking about Ruth Bader Ginsburg in that fashion could square the circle of being both respectful and also not playing into leftist propaganda in the way that you're talking about.
And I didn't know that was happening, which is a little bit rare, but it's been a busy weekend for me.
For everyone.
Right. But I mean, yes, if you want to specifically look, if you are somebody who is generally on the right on Twitter with 2 followers and you want to talk a bunch of smack, then go ahead. Literally nobody cares.
Mm.
And if that's the sole output of you talking smack, or, you know, you and your friends are emailing each other or whatever, something that is not public, fine. I don't know if it's particularly the best idea in the world, but whatever. But if this is going to be, you know, we're going to document what her career was like, and it is not favorable, but what we're not doing is running around screaming "Ding dong, the witch is dead," then that is a particularly good move, in my opinion.
Yeah, and I think, well, and this is, I don't know why I necessarily brought up this subject, because it's not something I have much to say about at all. I do think that and I know I'm a hypocrite for saying this, but the right does need to learn the value of prudent silence. And I think that in the case of Ruth Bader Ginsburg, prudent silence with the tacit respects owed to any soul who passes away is probably the best thing we can do. Honest obituaries that are honest about the deviations from what her progressive fan base would expect are also a respectful way to deal with this person's passing. But I guess what I was going to ask you about is, how do you think this is going to play out in terms of the election that's coming up?
Oh boy, am I torn on this. I am, to a near mortal certainty, they at least put a judge up and give it a shot, because that is what everybody is signaling is happening, and it is probably going to happen within the next 5 days that they start. Again, that's what everybody's signaling is happening. I think that this idea that this is going to suddenly supercharge either base is incorrect. You know, if they actually appoint someone, then there's not a seat, though. I guess Joe Biden could just say, we're going to put 27 judges on the Supreme Court, and then maybe that does, but I doubt it, because Biden doesn't supercharge anybody ever. You know, he very much has the Hillary problem of just nobody cares. Or like, well, he's not Trump, so I'll vote for him, I guess. And I think, being as that's the most likely course of action, that they do indeed put somebody in there. I get the feeling we're not going to have time to go over jurisprudence. We're all going to be sad, just like we were with Gorsuch 2 months ago. And it is not going to be the giant win that we want it to be. And I think even worse is that we're going to pretend like it is, because we like to celebrate our losses as victories.
Well, this is what I always say about the Supreme Court. The most important thing to understand for the right is not how we can get to a certain number of Supreme Court justices, but why. Yeah. And the deep reasons why conservative Supreme Court justices have progressive voting records, which they invariably do. Some of them, like Alito or Scalia, stick to their guns, but that's as most as they ever do. For the most part, conservative justices drift left over time. Yeah. And this has been the pattern for the court for as long as I can remember. And I think this points to having a much more broader understanding of politics that goes beyond the proceduralism and jurisprudence as it exists in the formalized law. There's obviously a lot of stuff going on in the background.
Sure. So my quick answer to why they drift left is, I don't know how quick this is going to be, but I'm going to try. So bear with my shorthand. The left exists based on an attempt to alleviate reality, and the way that they do that is to remove consequences. And if you're a Supreme Court justice, there are no consequences, so leftism seems very appealing.
Yeah, I guess my reasons for why they drift left is more or less the NRX ones. There's a larger power apparatus sitting behind the government that is left-wing and that moves to the left and that encourages people in elite positions to always go to the left. And they swim in the same stream as everyone else does, therefore they naturally drift to the left. Furthermore, there have been a number of critical Supreme Court precedents that have been enacted 30 or 40 years ago that we have since enthroned as being more or less the constitutional word of law, that by their very logic insist that we keep on going in the same leftward civil rights direction as we started out in the 70s. And those two forces are really sufficient to explain why Supreme Court justices always go left. I don't think even if they replace Ruth Bader Ginsburg with Amy Barrett that you're going to see an overturning of Casey versus Planned Parenthood or Roe v. Wade.
I have very serious doubts.
Yeah, this is not going to happen. And I think real political realists understand that there are barriers to this.
I mean,
I just think everyone should take it with a grain of salt.
Yeah, if you somehow drummed up, I don't know, 6 more Justice Thomases, and you put him on the Supreme Court 6 more times, and all you did was replace the overt leftists and then Roberts, who also an overt leftist, and you left Thomas and Alito, and I don't know, let's even say the 2 that Trump appointed. Or one of the 2 that Trump appointed, and then 6 more Thomases, you would see Roe v. Wade get overturned. Anybody think that's happening?
Yeah.
And
I mean, this is just what this is just the reality we live in. And I guess for this reason, I've taken a step back from worrying about these political issues and thinking more in terms of long-term relationship that I and anyone in my community has with the mainstream. And that's really what my focus is on this channel. And probably, as you've guessed, most of the NRX community, I'm sure you see similar sentiments coming out of Charlemagne and Academic Agent as well.
I do. I don't even know how else to describe this. My worry for all of you is that they are going to outlaw you. And
I'm sure they will at some point, but how would they enforce this, I guess, is the question. They can outlaw what we're doing, but what we're doing is so innocuous that to outlaw it would immediately destroy the credibility that we live inside a free society, and therefore the credibility they have of ruling.
They won't go at you directly, right? I mean, okay, maybe 100 years down the road, the progressives own everything and they don't care about credibility anymore. Then they'll go after you directly. But we'll all be dead by then. So I'm worried about that for my kids and their kids, but not for you guys in particular. But what they will do is, red flag laws should be the most terrifying thing in the world in this sense. Because what they're
for the chat, can you define red flag laws?
Yeah. So red flag laws are a proposition in America that if you own a gun, any number of people, and depends on where they are, but professionals or friends or what have you, can go to the government and say, that person's a crazy person. I don't think he should have guns. And if the courts determine that that person is correct, your sister or whatever, then they send cops to your house and they take your guns. And if you resist them in any way, they shoot you because the people... the one thing the cops know about you is that you have a gun. So they're on edge to begin with.
And that you have a red flag of some variety that's unspecified, right?
Exactly. You are evidently a crazy person with a firearm. You think those cops aren't on edge? Because they are,
Well, I think Charlemagne in the chat is replying to this, and I agree with him. I will take it as writ that these laws will be used against right-wingers. They probably were designed for that very purpose.
Well,
I suppose we could try to slow them down in coming about, right?
That is going to be a requirement. There's either really unrealistic things happen and they never pass, or we water them down, or we something, right? But we better be holding those off, because if you're on the right, there's a decent chance you own a gun. And knowing that you've spent a substantial period of time in California, people who own guns in California are crazy people. Just ask, anyone will tell you. It is ridiculous. And so, if you're conservative in California and you own a gun and your neighbor knows about it, and if you go shooting, I promise you, your neighbor knows, because they've stared out the window and gone, there's the creepy guy with the gun again. As soon as they say, that you going out and being a prepper is a mental disorder. And by the way, they're mostly already there. If you own a gun, you'll be considered a prepper by your anti-gun doctor, by your anti-gun neighbor, by your anti-gun teacher, whomever, and they will send cops to your house to take your firearms. And this will result in a lot of death, which will be said, anybody who dies will be, see how crazy of a person they were. We knew they shouldn't have guns. And they, again, will pay no price for this. But this is the method they will come after you. They won't simply say, if you go to church, then you should be put in prison for life. Though they have been running the playbook that is, if you go to church, you believe in make-believe guy in the sky, so you're an idiot and a crazy person anyway.
Yeah.
So,
and they've succeeded in shutting down pretty much half the churches in this country for the better half of 2020. So
yeah,
this is all coming. I guess I have to say that we have to evaluate on a case-by-case basis the tools we use to fight against this.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that oftentimes the right has a very narrow perspective on how to do this. I think they think that the way to fight this is to fight really, really hard in the legislature. I tend to think the way to fight this is to critically examine the stakeholders in the society where you live, and then to identify the ones that are getting screwed over by the present system and to build alliances. And then to ask them to see your struggle against the mainstream as the same as their struggle against the mainstream, and go from there.
What's the final output of that, right? Because I mean, look, one of those things that I think we all agree on is that more than any generalized group in the whole world, any other group, the right feels alone. And so this thing where quite literally having one friend to talk to that is generally right wing, even if you don't agree, is orders of magnitude better than everyone around me is a progressive. But the question then becomes, what happens next?
What the right has not done is the right has not gone outside of its comfort area to make friends internationally, or even in areas where they've not been, even among communities where they haven't typically been strong. And I feel that this is something that needs to be opened up as a new area of expansion for the right wing. And
I love the South African guys.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's not just the South African guys. I mean, I'm sure if you look at California as a state, there are a lot of communities here that have grievances with how the California Democratic Party has run this state, and very few of them are right wing in the classic sense, or have classical right wing grievances.
Mm-hmm.
White South Africans are not a traditional. They're not a traditional part of a Republican coalition, but they also are people that have very, very right wing grievances.
Yeah,
well, and that's why I'm asking for us to think beyond. For me, anyone is an ally who has distinct grievances with the California Democratic Party, and also is able to empathize with communities that might be suffering under their rulership.
So I think before you're going to get, and this is going to sound really dickish, but I think it's true. Before you're going to get empathy from any of these people, we're going to have to go out and do things for them, because a lot of them, and I know this sounds cynical, but a lot of them, whatever problems they have, they're more happy to have if they think someone is helping them and giving them something than they are to oppose if they think they'll get nothing.
Mm-hmm.
And so this, by the way, is this is sort of the thing that I'm talking about The premise that you're going after here is why I say we should write legislation that the progressives will find appealing, at least the masses. I mean, don't get me wrong. Nancy Pelosi will probably see through this in 2 minutes, and she will be pissed. But I don't need to worry about Nancy Pelosi insofar as she's never going to vote for anything that I like anyhow. So if it's unchangeable, then don't worry about it. You can't stop the sunrise, so why try?
I think eventually the right wing is going to be reborn as people who have a vested interest in running this area like a country and not like a staging area for global techno capital and projects to alleviate poverty in the third world. And it's ironic because a lot of people want to actually live in America, the country, and not America, like I said, the refugee, the staging area for all of these larger global programs. And I think those people are not necessarily classic right-wing constituencies. And I think that a dialogue needs to be opened up about with those communities. A lot of communities would benefit if this country's population growth happened a majority through births and a minority through immigration, as opposed to being a majority through immigration. Yeah. And those people, a lot of people will understand that, and not just, like I said, the classic right-wing constituencies.
So this goes right to a thing that I end up saying almost every single day, which is to say there are two groups in America: everyone to the right of Mao and everyone to the left of Mao. And if you're not to the left of Mao, then we probably agree about a lot of stuff, and let's work on that, right? Because I think you are entirely right. My opinion is, at least for the moment, the left has pushed way too far. They have alienated a lot of people who are either very angry or very scared, and reaching out to them is going to be useful, right? And I'm not doing this, in some particularly I can't even think of the word. Surreptitious way, right? I'm not trying to con these people. I'm overtly right wing about nearly everything, and but in the meantime, I think we can agree that burning down major cities is bad. I think there's some good ground we can work on to make things go the direction that I want to see them go.
Well, I guess the real problem with all of this eventually is that the right wing needs an elite core, and it doesn't really have one, or doesn't have a very large one at all. It has these old school wasps that all come from these older families back east, but it doesn't have any of the newer elites that now more or less call the shots everywhere. And eventually we're going to have to drag some elites off and create new communities that can speak in a broader language. And I understand that we'll make inroads to other working class communities, and I think that's very, very important, because those are the people that I'm ultimately concerned about helping. But I'm enough of a cynical Machiavellian to know that that you can get as many town folk as you want in your coalition, unless you have an earl or a prince or a duke or two. The solidarity between the various craftsmen and townsfolk isn't going to hold out for the long term at all.
Oh, no. Lenin and the Fabians, this is twice today I get to say this, Lenin and the Fabians were both right about this. The proletariat gets bored with the revolution. And they church it up a little bit, but that's what they're talking about. If you just get a group of miscellaneous people together, maybe 5 of them are worth something in the long term. And those are the 5 that you need, right? Because they can go back to that group of people and say, hey, I'm doing a thing. And they'll get 50% support out of the group at any given time, but they will be the thing that is directing the support to do something useful.
One of the things I think that Republicans don't understand about the African American community is that the African American community, normally conservatives are right that there are some African American Republicans, and a lot of African Americans have opinions that are conservative in a variety of ways, not least of which because they actually want to live in America, the country, and not the staging area for global programs and global techno capital.
Yeah.
But what the left understood and understood well from day one is that they have focused very hard and very well on capturing 100% of the aristocracy of the African American community. So the Republican sentiments inside the African American community kind of operate as one-offs, disconnected pieces that don't actually lead to anything living.
And
And the Republican individuals in the African American community are just isolated individuals that have no larger relevance. They're just weirdos, right? But the Democratic force in the African American community is organized. There's a ladder upwards. If you want to get somewhere as an African American professional, all of the organizations of African American professionals are 100% Democrat.
Yep.
They're more Democrat than anything. And for this reason, they have them as a very, very cohesive and lasting power arrangement in their coalition. And this is something that and it's because they've dominated the aristocracy, the elites of this community. And that's something that I think reactionaries and conservatives need to understand how they're going to do that with other communities.
I'm going to say something really unpopular here.
Okay.
That's the value of Candace Owens.
You're right. That's very controversial here on. But Candace Owens can't make more Candace Owens. That's the problem, right? Jesse Jackson, and even Al Sharpton can make a billion little Al Sharptons that all get funded. But the appeal of Candace Owens sells to a wide audience, which is why I'm always skeptical of her lasting impact.
Yeah. She's going to have to survive for a while before it's really valuable. But what she is doing right now that basically nobody is talking about is she's starting her own little companies. She is starting her own little black conservative groups all over the country, right? So she is creating these little funnels. Now, whatever your other opinions of Candace Owens are, if she is successful in what she is doing, she will have created the infrastructure. And if she does literally nothing else, and as long as we can keep hold of that infrastructure, that will have been the value of Candace Owens.
Well, I'm going to punt on that because of all the communities in America, I understand the least. The African American community is right up there. I will table that as a possibility. But I think where I've always thought the real focus could go is inside the community of artists that exist inside white elite communities. I wouldn't wonder if there aren't a lot of people that feel stifled by the new progressive orthodoxies and aren't looking for a broader language to express their ideas in. Maybe this is my own egotistical fantasy because obviously I come from a community that specializes in these people, but I always wonder if they're not looking for something new.
Let me come round and support this idea. So it's small, make no mistake. It is not the mega titan that is Hollywood, but there are already outputs of this, right? So Nick Searcy, Adam Baldwin, Clint Eastwood to a degree, these people are all making their own production companies. They're all putting together their own methods of, creating movies from the ground up. They've released a handful of movies, and they tend to be employing more conservative people because the selection bias is, I can go do this job somewhere where I don't have to be a progressive. And so the conservatives run from Hollywood, though they can never go back. So if they are successful, again, there's a lot of ifs here because building this kind of thing, it's dodgy. It does not necessarily guarantee anything, like most endeavors, right? But if they are successful with what amounts to creating right-wing Hollywood, even enough that they never overtake Hollywood, but they're 75% of it, that is a gigantic win of unreasonable proportions.
I always think I don't like the idea of a right-wing Hollywood because I think the way that we're eventually going to create an alternative to Hollywood is to become less ideological and less political. I am incredibly sick of politicized blockbusters and things with implicit progressive messaging inside of them. And
Yeah.
I haven't liked Hollywood movies for a very long time on purely quality grounds, but now it's becoming really sickening. And I don't know, I really feel like I could use some kind of outlet that wasn't constantly poisoned by these really banal political points and these really banal pieties that get inserted inside of them. And so I would want less of a right-wing Hollywood than I would want just independent people who are not progressive working together to make independent movies.
That is definitively my bad framing. So they do. I have seen a few of these movies. Otherwise, I would not know. They do make movies that people who are more right wing are more likely to be interested in. But there's what was that movie about the abortion guy in
Kurt Gosnell?
Yeah,
right?
that. Did you watch that?
I think my wife did. I'm very sensitive to conservative propaganda, so as soon as I saw that, I'm like, that's propaganda, I'm out.
So give it a watch. And maybe it is just that I am in a very similar boat to you in the sense of I loved movies my entire life, and these days I can't turn on a TV to save my life. It just, everything is just, oh God, you know what? I will take a very, very small amount of progressive BS, but none of you can hold it there. It has to be over the top. And I didn't get that feeling with right-wing propaganda out of this movie. Don't get me wrong.
We're getting better. I mean, the right wing is getting better at it, but I'm talking about, well, I guess when I get really excited about things, it's when I see a right-wing concept exist in a movie that is absolutely not ideological at all. I remember, this isn't even a very good movie, but I remember seeing A Quiet Place that came out a few years ago. Mm-hmm. It's a horror movie about animals that attack you, or aliens that attack you when they hear sound. It's kind of a stupid. It's a stupid concept, but there were just subtle little moments that felt very, very right wing because they weren't explicitly progressive, and because of that, the movie itself became this framework. Even though it wasn't particularly good, it became a way of talking about ideas, and that was felt somehow liberated from the direction Hollywood is going writ large. And I felt that was refreshing. And if just things like that would be quite refreshing, and I'd be interested in seeing them.
I think you will find a lot of what you're looking for. So, insofar as the right is simply not the left, they are definitively right-wing institutions, but they're, somebody interviewed Nick Searcy about this a while back, and he said, no, I don't want to make right-wing propaganda. I just want to make good movies that aren't full of propaganda anymore. To which he was asked, well, isn't that right-wing propaganda? And he went, well, I didn't think so until you asked.
Again, we're coming up on sort of my hard time stop here, but I will say that, like, this is something that needs to be an open discussion on the right, and it needs to be, I hate to say it needs to be something that's openly discussed on the right, because it only really works if we deframe it politically. It needs to be an open discussion among people who are not on the left.
Yeah.
And because at this point, I would rather watch a movie that was sympathetic to Iran or sympathetic to the Taliban than I would another Hollywood movie, because at least it would be from a different perspective. It would be refreshing. And so I think that this needs to be a conversation that's had at the broadest possible level with as many people from as many cultures that see something wrong with the progressive worldview and the progressive dream about how the world is going to evolve. And if we can have that larger conversation, then I think that we have a very, very promising possibility for something that's new and sincere, and that people are going to be genuinely attracted to in a positive way.
Maybe that's what we do, is we start our own movie review.
Well, hey, for instance, I would love to see a Mongolian movie or a movie from Uzbekistan. It's any movie that tells a story that's outside of the Hollywood framing. I'm so thirsty for something that is fresh and where I don't constantly have to be looking over my shoulder for some kind of sneaking or creeping ideological message in the background. And I think that I could imagine that, right? I could imagine, one of my favorite directors, Akira Kurosawa. One of the reasons why his movies are just so refreshing is, or Japanese movies, and I haven't seen Japanese movies for a really long time, but at least in the 90s, they shared this when you walked into a Japanese movie, you didn't know the politics that were going on, and so you came to it as a complete third party. For instance, and this is another bad movie, but in the movie Battle Royale, I have the vague sense that the main villain, he's like this gym teacher from hell, who's running this whole basically the Hunger Games, but the Japanese version. I have this vague understanding that he's a parody of a right winger, but it's important that I don't that doesn't mean anything to me, right? It doesn't mean anything to me, and therefore I can just watch this gym teacher from hell villain, and I can really appreciate him as a character and not as an archetype of some leftist fantasy,
There's the difference, as often as not, I find, comes down to one line of dialogue, right? So everybody's had a jerk off gym teacher. That I mean, they're gym teachers. That's at least 10% of them are like that all the time, and it's much more like 50. So all of us can go watch a jerk off gym teacher and not have to consider his politics. But if the opening of the movie is far-right Republican gym teacher baby eater, you're like, oh, come on, man, it could have been so good.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And it's just like they're making a remake they're making a prequel to One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest called Nurse Ratched. And I'm like, no, I'm not going to engage with that. Well, I got a super chat, so I'm obligated to read this before. I hear one of my mods in the chat saying that he would Russian cinema is the way to go, and I always thought that would be really awesome. I've never seen this movie, but I would always have loved like there was this book called Loris about a Russian knight during the time when Russia was just coming into existence, when they were beating back the Golden Horde and the Mongols and taking control, and Slavs were taking control of the country again. It would be such a beautiful movie to do sort of an over-the-top sort of knights heroism with all the dresses and period piece. That would be amazing. I would watch the hell out of that movie.
This sounds epic.
Yeah, that movie would sell even with Russian subtitles, or even with English subtitles over Russian. Right. Plus, I'm sure they could get some real bombshell Russian actresses to play the love interests. That would be amazing.
100% guaranteed.
Even let's take a progressivism of yesteryear. Even a remake of War and Peace would be amazing. Actually, they did a version of War and Peace about 10 years ago that was really good. I mean, obviously, it was Hollywood, but it was pre-2012 Hollywood, and they did a really good job. I didn't watch all of it, but
really?
From what I saw, it looked really good. I mean, believe it or not, they didn't have any diverse casting in that movie about Russians fighting French people.
Wow.
So the one super chat, and I have to literally go, so please, I appreciate the super chat, but I can't answer any more. So Kiewich for New Zealand $10 says David Cole's piece on Cersei et al. On conservative Hollywood and Takis Mag is devastating. He blasts them as self-interested grifters whose projects are doomed to fail.
Yeah,
and I don't know. I think it's just there needs to be a fundamental rethinking of how this is going to go. The world writ large, not just conservatives, are hungry for non-progressive, non-Hollywood takes. And Hollywood, I think, has conquered Europe. So I think that this is going to be an international conversation about how we make good cinema that does not fall into this pit of ideology that we see constantly being slung from Hollywood. But with that, do you want to say anything else so I can shut down the stream because I'm way over on this?
By all means, thanks for having me. I'll let you go.
No, it was a lot of fun, Don. Thanks a lot. Everyone subscribe to Don's YouTube channel. And thank you for being accommodating to my very restrictive times I have for streaming. So, anyway, guys, yeah, have a good day.